Hello students, I am Sanjay Matapati, Assistant Professor, MCA Department, IICMR. Welcome to the video series of Python programming. In this part of video, we will be discussing on Introduction to Object-Oriented Concepts in Python. Topics to be covered under this particular chapter: objects and classes, data attributes and methods, instance variables, methods and constructors, encapsulation, polymorphism, and inheritance. At the end of the chapter, students are able to understand, create objects, recognize data attributes and methods for given objects, use the dot notation to access the data attributes and methods of an object, demonstrate the implementation of instance variables, methods and constructors, understand encapsulation, polymorphism, and inheritance. The basic idea of object-oriented programming is that we use objects to model real-world things that we want to represent inside our programs and provide a simple way to access their functionality that we would otherwise be hard or impossible to utilize. Large programs are challenging to write. Once the program reaches a certain size, object-oriented programs are actually easier to program than non-object-oriented ones. As the programs are not disposable, an object-oriented program is much easier to modify and maintain than non-object-oriented program. So, object-oriented program requires less work to maintain over the time. Object-oriented programming results in code reuse, cleaner code, better architecture, abstraction layers, and fewer programming bugs. Python provides full support for object-oriented programming, including encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. In the real world, you will often find many individual objects of all the same kind. There may be thousands of cars of the same make and model which were built from same blueprint, therefore contains the same components. In object-oriented terms, it is said that each car is an object of class known as car. Class objects are often used to model the real-world objects that you find in everyday life. Objects are key to understanding object-oriented technology. A class is a blueprint from which individual objects are created. An object is a bundle of related state, that is variables, and behavior, that is methods. Object contain variables which represents the state of information about the thing you are trying to model, and methods represent the behavior or functionality that you want it to have. Creating class and object. Classes are defined by using the class keyword followed by the class name, which is user defined name, and a colon. Class definitions must be executed before they have any effect. The statement inside the class definition will usually be function, that is methods. Creating a class. Now see the syntax to create the class. Class is the standard keyword. So class name, then documentation string. Variables, there are different types of variables like instance variables, static variables, and local variables. We will be discussing in detail all these types of variables in later session. Then the methods, instance methods, static methods, and class methods. So the documentation string represents the description of the class. Within the class, docstring is always optional. We can get the docstring by using the following two ways. Either we can use print className dot doc attribute, or we can type help className. See, here is the example how to get the documentation string for a particular class. Let's define a class called mobile that has two methods associated with it. One is receive message and another is send message. The first parameter of each of these methods is the word self. When self is used, it is just a variable name to which the object that has created based on the class is assigned. In the method definition, self doesn't need to be the only parameter and it can have multiple parameters. Creating the mobile class provides us with a blueprint for an object. Just because you have defined a class doesn't mean you have created and mobile objects. Often the first argument of the method is called self. This is nothing more than the convention. The name self has absolutely no special meaning to Python. However, by not following this convention, your code may be less readable to other Python programmers. Here I have defined one more method, init, which is constructor for the class. We will be discussing in details about the constructor in later slides. Let's see one more example of creating the class and the objects. Here you can see I have used a variable self. Self is the default variable which is always pointing to the current object, like this keyword in Java. By using self, we can access instance variables and instance method of object. Students, please take one more note here, that the self should be the first parameter inside the constructor, as well as self should be the first parameter inside the instance method. Let's see how the objects are created in the Python. The physical existence of a class is nothing but the object. Objects are usually refers to a particular instance of a class where the object contains variables and methods defined in the class. We can create any number of objects for a class. Class objects support two kinds of operations: attribute references and instantiation. The term attribute refers to a name, that is variable or method, following a dot. This is a syntactic construct. The act of creating an object from a class is also called as instantiation. The name in the class are referenced by the objects and are called attribute reference. There are two kinds of attribute references: data attributes and method attributes. Variables defined within the methods are called instance variables and are used to store the data values. New instance variables are associated with each of the objects that are created for class. These instance variables are also called data attributes. Method attributes are methods inside a class and are referenced by objects of the class. Attribute references use the standard dot notation syntax as supported in Python. The variable which can be used to refer object is called a reference variable. By using reference variable, we can access attributes and methods of an object. Here you can see the syntax, that how to create the reference variable and instantiate by the name of the class. This is the syntax to access the data attribute, that is object name dot data attribute name. The syntax for assigning the values to data attribute is that object name dot data attribute equals to the given value, where the value can be of integer, float, string types, or any other object itself. The syntax to call the method attribute is somewhat like this: object name dot method attribute name. Let's see the example with creation of object and instantiation. Here we have already defined the class named as class student, and two methods are there. One is constructor and one is the talk method. We have created the object s1 and also instantiated with the constructor by passing the values. Of course, just to call the talk method, we are using s1 dot the method name talk, and here is the output for the same. Let's throw some highlights on the constructor concept. The constructor is a special method in the Python. Constructor will be executed automatically at the time of object creation. The main purpose of the constructor is to declare and initialize the instance variables. The name of the constructor should be init. Some attributes of the constructors are: per object, constructor will be executed only once. The constructor can take at least one argument, and if it is taking only one argument, it must be self. The constructor is optional, and if we are not providing any constructor, then the Python will provide the default constructor. Now see the example which will explain something about the constructor. Here we have defined a constructor with the variable self, and some other variables are also there like name, roll number, and marks. Now this is the program where we have used this constructor. Of course, this is the user-defined method M1. Now this program illustrates that we have created three objects T1, T2, and T3. All the times we have not passed anything, but it will call the default constructor with respect to this particular class definition. Here we have called t1.m1, that is user defined method. So this is the method execution. So constructor is executed three times, that is per object the constructor executed at least once. These are some of the differences between methods and the constructors. A normal method, the name of the method can be any user defined Python acceptable name, but the constructor name should be always init. Method will be executed if we call that method. The constructor we need not to call explicitly. Constructor will be executed automatically at the time of object creation. The method per object method can be called any number of times, while the constructor per object will be called only once. Inside the method we can write any business logic, while inside the constructor we have to declare and initialize the instance variables. So students, this is end of the section 1. Stay with me for section 2.